How do we bridge the manufacturing labor gap? Lisa Walker is Managing Director and Global Industrial Practice Leader at DHR Global. Hi, Lisa.
Hello, how are you doing today?
Good. Thanks so much for being with me today. Lisa, how serious is the skills gap and the labor shortage in the manufacturing sector right now?
I think there's multiple ways of looking at that. I think if you look at where we are today, unemployment remains high in the manufacturing sector, but it's not as high as it was. So you could say we're starting to close that gap. However, if you take a 5-year or 10-year perspective, there are companies where 20, 30, 40% of the population may be retiring over the next 5 to 10 years.
Wow.
And that's in the industrial sector, chemical sector, et cetera. So it depends on the timeline where you want to look. But I would say this is a problem that we have under control at the moment if you keep barriers on that. But it's something that we have to keep our eye on because the demographics are not in our favor.
The big if. We have it under control if things go the way we need them to go. Are we
Exactly.
talking United States here, Lisa, or is this a global observation?
I think this is heavily a U.S. Observation from the perspective of the retirements in North America. And if
Mhm.
you look at how the U.S. has dealt with the reduction in workforce, it has been by moving a lot of these jobs overseas.
Right.
And I think that brings itself into the question of where are these jobs going and how do we have a safe and secure and cost-effective supply chain while we balance risk, labor availability, raw materials, et cetera,
I've
labor
seen
cost.
I have seen statistics saying that 2.1 million jobs could go unfilled by 2030,
Yeah.
adding $1 trillion in cost in 2030 alone. That's kind of serious. I mean, that's something to look out for, right?
I I count that as serious, and as though we all want to say it's going to be replaced by efficiency and robotics, I think some of it will be replaced by efficiency and robotics. A
Okay.
big piece of it will not,
Well, before we get to the talk of robotics, let's talk about people.
right?
First of all, in terms of solutions, how are we going to find the actual people? The bodies, I hate to use that word because they are alive. How are we going to find the people to do the work?
Okay, well, first of all, let's be realistic. If you look at kind of industrial and you look at the movement of goods, it hasn't been as sexy or as glamorous as being in software over the last decade or the last 20 years. So a lot of the engineering talent, a lot of the typical, what I'll call optimization engineering talent has gone to financial services and it's gone to software. They pay more, you can do them remotely, and at the end of the day, they're, more glamorous roles. So
Mhm.
I think in one perspective, you've got to change the perception of what is manufacturing. In many regards, it is the backbone of so many companies, so many countries' economies. And so there's a lot of glamour if we want to position it that way. Compared to a bank, though, it's hard to compete. So one, we've got to raise the attractiveness of the sector. Part of that comes into raising the compensation of the sector, which gets back to, literally supply and demand. So I
Mhm.
think as our demand goes up, our supply will come in because you will see folks from the technology sector moving in to industrial, and they will pick up the manufacturing skills, data, analytics. Some of the skills are very, really transferable. You've
So,
already seen it as the tech sector's dropped.
certainly the layoffs we've seen in tech indicate that there may be a pretty willing workforce to come back into manufacturing if indeed we can address those issues that you talked about. And it's not just perception as if we're changing people's view of something that itself isn't changing. Manufacturing itself is a different animal now too, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
It's so much higher tech, and the industries that are attractive are what I call the new economy sectors, right? Whether it's
Mhm.
water, whether it's e-vehicles, all the elements of energy and sustainability, those are very attractive segments where you're making an impact in the world and in people's lives and in the future, something that the tech sector has kind of owned from a glamour perspective.
So what kind of skills would we be looking for that are different from what they were in the past on the manufacturing production line?
So I think, narrowly, I think the engineering colleges are even starting here. It used to be the engineers, don't know how to read, they don't have people skills, they're engineers and they sit on the line.
Mhm.
That's changing. Engineers, supply chain executives are so much more cross-functional. Our best chief supply chain officers are evaluated not just on the cost and the risk dimensions, but also on the revenue dimensions. So these executives and their managers serve as general managers in many regards, looking at the full P&L and the full people and risk aspects of running a supply chain. That is part of the attractiveness, and that's one of the things that's changed and needs to continue to evolve to attract the talent that we need.
If in fact a candidate doesn't have exactly the skills that we need for a manufacturing job, are there kinds of adjacent experiences that might apply to manufacturing?
That's a good question. I think at the end of the day, there are adjacencies. That's as much about a specific person. We hear today that so many jobs are getting filled by literally AI matching or word matching on a resume into a job. And that's a different link in itself, a different podcast.
Hmm.
But there is an element of truth to that. At the end of the day, though, smart people figure things out and always have been. And engineers and manufacturing talent has typically come because they want to build things, they want to be problem solvers. So I do believe those skills are transferable. What you have to look at is I would call a similar business model. So pulling someone out of pharma, which may be manufacturing, and putting them into a fast moving, short cycle manufacturing environment probably won't work. You've got a
Yeah.
long business with a short cycle business, a high risk with a low risk business. So if you look at what are the fundamentals of your business model, match those to another industry, I think you can be highly successful moving people around and moving people into manufacturing.
In the future, where will we go to get the people? Will there be new sources of labor that we can draw on?
So, that's a bigger question than I can answer if I look at immigration policies and I
Yeah.
look at, and you look at literally retirement ages, right? It's a great question. I think that as a country, that's a very political discussion, which we won't get into here. I also think, in search, we kind of laugh and we say, 60, 40, 60 is the new 40. We used to see a time when many executives and professionals were retiring in that early 60 to 65 years. And now we're seeing people happily stay out and stay in the workforce 65 to 70. And they have the energy, they have the desire, they actually have the institutional knowledge. And interestingly enough, it's private equity that has been more open to that than any other capital structure. Family-owned businesses to some extent as well. So I do think you're going to see some of that talent. It's going to stay in the workforce longer. It may not be as accessible depending on capital structure, but family-owned businesses, private equity have been more open to it typically than many public companies.
How can diversity efforts help? Can we draw from a broader demographic of different people, men, women, people of color, things like that, to do a better job of that, thereby creating a greater potential workforce?
100%. And if you look at the number of diversity of female in particular graduates, the number is continuing to grow, and it's continuing to grow going into manufacturing and STEM related jobs and careers. You're seeing much more flexible hybrid working, especially, I would say in those early family years when people are starting a family in their 30s and may need a little bit more flexibility, and then staying in the workforce so that they're continuing on, so that when they move up in the ranks, they're still there. So I think that the demographics, from that perspective of greater attraction into engineering and into technical roles is there. I also think we're seeing greater retention, and you're seeing support from the top to keep those people in the workforce. Again, whether it's different ethnic backgrounds, race backgrounds, gender, and even economic backgrounds.
Mm-hmm. So is there an aspect of manufacturing work that would allow for the possibility of hybrid work? Because, the image of the person on the production line is you have to actually be there.
Well, income robotics. I think
Mm.
absolutely you're seeing more of that, as you're seeing the number of people staffing a plant has gone way down in some areas. Still in heavy assembly, you've seen more labor, but you've also seen a lot of the robots and the hybrid situations where people are able to control those and watch those with a higher span of control. So you're seeing more go through the line because people are doing that through robotics and through greater sensing. And you're also seeing that opening to more companies being flexible to a 10-hour work week, 4 days a week, things like that, which is allowing a broader reach of lifestyles to appreciate manufacturing jobs.
You
And
think,
at the end of the day, money talks. If
yeah.
manufacturing continues to invest and pay well, people will find a way. They'll make the trade-off.
Mm-hmm. to a point. I'm sure manufacturers don't want to go crazy with paying people what they're worth, because that could
Exactly.
raise prices and challenge the whole idea of reshoring and nearshoring. But certainly you would hope for that. Do you
Well,
think?
I was saying, if you ask people, do you think a gallon of gasoline is more expensive than a gallon of coffee? Most people say, oh, a gallon of gasoline is much more expensive than a gallon of coffee. Then you
Mm,
ask them the price at the pump versus the price at the Starbucks, and you get a bright-eyed look. So
yeah, for
some of
sure.
that, I think we as manufacturing folks need to understand the role of marketing, marketing our employee brand, marketing our value proposition. So that also falls, to be honest, on the back of us manufacturing folks who think people will just understand it. And sometimes we need to toot our own horn a little bit more.
There again, the perception issue. Lisa, do you believe that the need for labor will continue to decline as automation takes hold, or are we going to need more people than ever?
I think you're going to see a new optimization. It's going to become somewhat bimodal, right?
Yeah.
Because the data analytics and the folks who really understand the numbers and how to drive implications out of the numbers, those higher skilled, that's going to continue to have demand. Because as AI comes, interpreting the data is not something, I think, in the next 10 years that we're going to leave to the powers that be or what's inside the black box. At the end of the day, if you look at kind of some of the route manufacturing roles, those will go away. And the ones that require a lower skill set. And so there's also the relative volume elements. If you're in a specialty business and you're doing custom and ETO and MTO, and engineering to order and manufacturing to order operations, there'll be less opportunity for systematic robotics.
Yeah. Lisa Walker of DHR Global, I want to thank you so much for helping to pose the problem of the labor gap in manufacturing, and as well as proposing some solutions and giving us a kind of a heartening view of the future. Thank you very much for being with me today.
Thank you.